Hey everyone, I'm Steve from GamersNexus.net, and today we're doing an SLI test using two 970s against a single 980 Ti to see what is the best value, because they're about the same amount of spend. You can spend $300 to $350-ish on each 970, putting you at about the $700 range, or you can spend in the $650 to $700 range on a single 980 Ti. In our test, we also included a single 980 and single R9 390X just to give some perspective, because those put you at the $420 range for the 390X and $500 range for the 980 non-Ti. But what we're really looking at here is the two 970s in SLI versus the single 980 Ti. So here's the thing with SLI. In the past, and this is true of Crossfire as well, the multi-card configurations have sometimes proven to be difficult to work with. So in some scenarios, some games, some driver sets, SLI and Crossfire scaling is so bad that it is sometimes almost better to disable one card and run just a single device. And obviously that kind of sucks to do, because then you're just throwing out half of your graphics processing configuration out the window. With SLI and DirectX 11, which is everything we tested today, you generally get an alternate frame rendering environment, and you can't stack the VRAM. So it's effectively using the second card as an additional processing engine, and the VRAM is ignored. For all of the testing methodology, check the link in the description below. That is the full article. It contains a lot more depth and will explain how we tested these games and what pitfalls we may have encountered or may have had to avoid in the testing of these games, given specific parameters and graphic settings and things like that. In Metro Last Light, the 980 Ti is favored and wins by 4.78% over the 970s and SLI, making it the better buy and definitely the more simple route to go in terms of configuration. And that's at 1080p. Looking at Fallout 4 at 1080p as well, the 980 Ti is again favored over the dual 970s, and that is a 5.48% advantage in the average FPS department. But there's some points to talk about with the 1% and 0.1% lows, which we'll get into momentarily after running through these charts. Shadow of Mordor at 1080p sees a favor or an advantage for the 970s in SLI, but the advantage is so small at 1080p that it is effectively unobservable. It's a 1.87% difference that is measurable in testing, that is outside of our margin of error, but as a user you will not notice that difference. At 4K resolution, there is actually a much more noticeable difference. It's 9.88%, but the frame rate's much lower as well. So again, sort of hard to notice, but 59 versus 53-ish FPS does actually give you some advantage in gameplay. With The Witcher 3 at the lower resolution of the two tested, the 970s and SLI are objectively superior to the 980 Ti, and there is a noticeable difference. The 970 SLI configuration performs 30.07% better than a single 980 Ti, and that is definitely noticeable and makes the 970s and SLI a better value than the same price single card configuration. At the highest resolution we tested, looking at that chart now, The Witcher 3 shows a 19.7% advantage for the 970s and SLI, making it interesting because it actually scales differently than the other games we tested, where you'll see SLI scaling improve as the resolution improves over the 980 Ti. In The Witcher 3, that is not the case, and the two 970s actually lose some ground, but still remain about 20% ahead of the single 980 Ti. Black Ops 3 is a bit different title. It is highly performant, very optimized, and runs well on most video cards, and this game favors the 970s and SLI by 17.23% at 1440 and 10.14% at 4K. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is brand new, and Syndicate, when it launched, had terrible SLI scaling. It was actually basically non-existent. So at game launch, you were better off just disabling one of your cards, because there were big hits to 1% and 0.1% low frame times, and that was a result of the way AFR works, and sometimes you'll get kind of a micro stutter with SLI. So that happened when the game was brand new, but has since been resolved through driver updates and optimizations. So now, looking at the game with the newest drivers, the performance is actually much improved, but the 980 Ti is still favored by 8.28%. So again, you're better off here with a single card configuration, and that now makes 3 points for the 980 Ti and 2 points for the 970s in SLI. Just Cause 3 is a game where there is absolutely no value to SLI because there's zero scaling for the most part. Very little scaling anyway. And the 980 Ti actually wins out by 26.89%. So similar to The Witcher 3, the 980 Ti is objectively superior. The Witcher 3, of course, the 970s and SLI were superior. But there's a bit of trading back and forth here. With Grand Theft Auto, the 970s and SLI have an 11.53% advantage, and that is improved again over the scaling of the game when it first came out. So that was a driver improvement, and we can draw a straight line here that shows the gains that NVIDIA has made in their drivers with SLI as time goes on, as drivers iterate. So day one launch drivers generally are not great for the support of SLI in the past year, as we've seen in testing. We've done all these videos. Now we're going to look at SLI scaling. That is the delta, the percentage difference, or delta, in performance between a single 970 SSC and two 970s, one being the SSC, the other being the hybrid. 1080p scaling in Metro Last Light, the dual 970 configuration is 26.26% advantaged at 1080p over a single 970. Pretty big gain, but not super impressive, especially considering the 980 Ti was the better card for this game. And it is 38.93% advantaged at 1440p and 43.20% advantaged at 4K. Fallout 4 at 1080p scaling is 31.12% favored for the SLI configuration over a single 970. So again, a major improvement. Shadow of Mordor, 46.14% at 1080p. So is it worth doing 970s and SLI as opposed to a single 980 Ti? Depends on where you're coming from. If you already own one 970, then it is clear that in some of these games, 4 of them that we tested, the two 970s are actually better than a single 980 Ti. And as someone who already owns half of what you need, the value isn't bad because you've already spent $300, $350, whatever it is, hopefully a while ago. So that money's gone. And now you can buy another card and in some cases improve your performance by 50%. In GTA, we saw a 60% performance increase at 4K. And in Black Ops 3, 57.89% at 4K, to the point where it's actually very playable at 4K using 970s. So depending on where you're coming from, if you already own half of the configuration, it may be worth doing 970s and SLI. As a new buyer, as someone building a new system today, then I would generally recommend a single 980 Ti unless you are very specifically playing one of these games that had a heavy performance advantage over the single 980 Ti. And when I say heavy, I mean more than the 1.87% in Shadow of Mordor, 5.48% in other games. So the 980 Ti's did better in Metro Last Light single card, Fallout 4 single card, and 2 more games, Assassin's Creed Syndicate single 980 Ti, Just Cause 3 single 980 Ti. The 970s had a massive advantage in The Witcher 3, which is really the only title that is showing the huge advantage we saw, and then in Black Ops 3, where it was a big enough performance gain at 1440 to put you close to 144 hertz. If you're trying to get that really fast and fluid FPS gameplay experience, then the SLI configuration is effectively required unless you're running a lower resolution like 1080p, in which case you could get away with a single card if you overclocked it a bit. So in our testing, there were 4 points for the 970s and SLI and 4 points for the 980 Ti single card in terms of the head-to-head. They were tied with each other depending on what game you looked at, but the difference of those points, the value of those points, depends on the game. The 980 Ti was always a minimum when it was ahead of 5% against the 970s and SLI. 970s and SLI got as high as 30% ahead in The Witcher 3. Here's what I would do. If I own half the configuration already, I would do a 970 SLI setup if I really wanted to push into 1440p and in some games 4K playability. Now you're still not going to be playing 4K with most games, even with 970s and SLI, because it's limited in a lot of ways. VRAM is definitely one of those. If I own nothing, no card, no build, and I'm building today, tomorrow, sometime soon, then the single device is the route I would go, and that is for a few reasons. One, on day one with game launches, there's better support for single cards. They're the same price, or thereabouts anyway, and the 980 Ti did have a 4-point to 4-point test result against the 970s and SLI. They were head-to-head exactly with some of these games. I would also choose a single card configuration because the 1% and 0.1% lows were advantaged to the 980 Ti almost every single test. That's something that's not shown in just the delta scaling values. Every single test, the 980 Ti had better 1% and 0.1% lows as compared to its average FPS output, and that is what will affect your gaming fluidity and how smooth the frame rate output looks as a user, what the apparent smoothness is despite the average FPS. So for those reasons, I would go the 980 Ti route if building a new system. If you're doing an SLI setup because you already own one card, 970s and SLI aren't bad. The scaling is actually very good these days for the games that it does get supported by. Just Cause 3 excluded here in these tests, and originally Assassin's Creed Syndicate, though now it works much better with SLI than it used to with its 33% scaling. So that is all for this test. I hope you liked the format. Please hit the Patreon link in the post-roll video. Check the article in the description below for more information. And if you want to learn about that 390X and its performance in these tests, check out that article. We'll do another video on AMD devices specifically, Crossfire, things like that in the near future. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.